our son never slept, like literally never. So we were just on all the time. At the time, I remember like, this is a nightmare. And now I look back, like I'd give anything to have
Really?
that. Yeah, yeah, miss it.
We're still in the this is a nightmare
Yeah,
phase.
it the nightmare ends at a certain point. Like like just when you're like, I can't stand it. They like develop in a way that you're like, oh, it's not so bad. Like now I can deal with it.
Yeah. It's uh basically like you'll get like 1 or 2 days of just like this is fine, and then something new, like a new tooth is coming in, and then it's hell again, or
You won't remember a minute of the bad stuff.
really.
You'll just be like, oh, remember that time we like went and rode on the train and it was a sunset. You'll just remember all that stuff.
Yeah.
And oh, I'd give anything, those golden days to come back again.
Yeah. Well, your son is in college now, right?
Yeah. It's like the thing you don't really realize when you're raising a child is like the 1 year old version, like when the kid turns like 5, you still remember that 1 year old kid who was a very specific kid, and
Mhm.
he's gone. You'll never see that kid again.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, there's a different kid that I also like,
Yeah.
but I miss that 1 year old. And that continues throughout because everybody I know has been like calcified at the same development stage, for 50 years. So it's very different.
But didn't you have heart surgery like right after your son was born?
2 years after, yeah.
And then
That was pretty heavy. That was like, okay, well, I got to see him for 2 years, and I made a little comic for him to read, like when he got older, like here's what your dad, thought of you and stuff.
oh man.
Yeah, it was brutal, but luckily he was too young to really like pick it up.
Yeah. But then your
If I
wife
ever
has to
talk
deal with
about
it.
it though, he freaks out. Like he doesn't like to hear about it.
Yeah. But your wife has to be like basically the only, because you weren't able to do anything right after surgery
I
for.
mean, I couldn't like physically like pick him up or anything, but he was 2 by then.
Yeah.
I could still yell at him and stuff.
from the from the
That's my
couch.
job. Yeah, I had this like recliner, like hospital chair that we rented, and I was just like in there with my like video player and like, yes, bring me soup now. It was actually kind of like the high point of my life.
Really? You're like Professor X. That's when just wheeling.
It was totally or Modoc. It was like that. But yeah, and it was just like everybody's really nice to me for once. It was great.
Were you able to do any work at all while you were recovering?
No, I was like all doped up and
Yeah.
yeah, just like you go through trauma when you have, even though you're like asleep during surgery, it's like your body knows like, yeah, you had like a chainsaw like to your rib cage. Like I
Mm.
have a scar like that,
Mhm.
and it's like somehow like I was in a horrible like carnage situation,
Mm.
and so it's like you can't just like I'm gonna go back to work. So it took me like 6 months.
Oh, 6 months. Okay.
Yeah,
Then after 6 months, you were
and,
able to like.
and laughing was the most painful thing.
Yeah.
Anything that made me laugh, I did. Like trying not
Oh.
to, like trying to like constrict my rib cage.
Oh God.
Yeah,
But
but
what were you? Was that after David Boring was finished or something, or what? I'm trying to.
it was after the death ray. I think
Oh,
it was pretty. It was like what 2006.
were you able to just do some writing, and then you weren't able to like sit and draw? You were just like I mean, were you doing anything that was creative?
I did a lot of reading. I read a lot of stuff that I had never, had time to read. And so that was really useful. And I just watched movies, like I had this like portable DVD player and I just watched hundreds of movies that I would have never had time for.
Mm.
And so it was really like I kind of built up all this inspiration during that time. It was it's like a lot of contemplation, it was useful. It was kind of a perfect time in my life to have a little break like that.
And that was basically the end of Eight Ball then, because Death Ray was the last issue of Eight Ball.
Yeah, I guess Death Race what 2004.
Yeah.
When we were doing comics, back in the olden days, you never thought of it as permanent or that people would be looking at it in the
Uh-huh.
future. Like it just felt like, okay, I'm doing this for my 95 readers and they'll read it and stick it in a box. And I don't have to like, I'm not like a politician where I have to
Yeah.
like stand by this for the rest of my life. We didn't know that was going to happen.
Right. And now here you are, 32 years later, discussing the collection of all of those comics.
It's impossible to wrap your head around. I often think like somebody reading Eight Ball now, the early issues of Eight Ball is like when I read Mad comics
Yeah.
when I started Eight Ball, it was like 35 years before.
Yeah.
And it seemed like the most vital, relevant thing in the world because I loved it so much, but it also seemed like it was from a distant, lost world that I had no actual part of. So it's weird to feel like, oh, I'm like, Al Williamson to somebody who's like 25 years old. Very hard to grasp. Although I only wish I looked as great as Al Williamson did when he
Yeah.
was.
Him and Frazetta, weren't they like both buff?
They were incredibly handsome guy. Williamson was just a suavest guy.
Hmm.
I went to a few comic conventions with him, and he was great. I
Oh,
never got what he did, like for the last 40 years of his life. It was very mysterious, but I liked him personally. I never met Frazetta. I saw him once. I was looking through some old photos recently, and I saw there was a photo from the San Diego Con in, I don't know, mid 2000s, and I was signing next to Al Feldstein, and I was like, I have no memory of meeting Al Feldstein. Like, I think I didn't talk to him, or I think he was already signing, and I just sat there and signed, but it was like, what? Like, how could that have happened? That should have been like the high point of my life. I love Al Feldstein. It's like my
yeah.
favorite artist in the world. And I was just like, what? So
Is he
weird.
really? He's one of your favorite artists in the world?
I love his EC art, the tortured. It's just so like intense,
Very stiff, though, right? I mean, it's a
love it. I love that. You'd never think he was like the guy who became like the big sort of corporate editor of Mad, the guy who was like the affable leader of the group. If you saw that art style, you'd think like this is like a dude who's like never left his studio. You'd think he's just some twisted, crazy artist. It's so tortured. It's to me his work is actually scary, which is
mhm.
not true of almost any other horror artist.
Yeah. What about Ingalls? Is he scary?
I mean, Ingalls, I always feel like Ingalls had like a diseased brain. Like when you look at his drawing, you're like, there is something drastically wrong with him, in a way that's great, but it just feels like the work of a lunatic.
Well, but wasn't Feldstein kind of a kiss ass to Gaines? I mean, don't you think that's how
I
he?
think, I think he was, and I think he was a much. I mean, there's that certain type of person who just like is a pretty good artist when they're young, and then they become an editor. It was
Yeah.
like Joe Orlando did that, Carmine Infantino,
Mhm.
all those guys kind of gave up being artists, and I can see why back in those days. Dick Giordano,
Yeah.
and it's just the guys who have some kind of people skills among all the weirdo comic artists. It's not like Ditko was gonna take over and be an editor. Can you
Yeah.
imagine? This is not good enough.
Right. It's either good or it's bad. There is
And it's bad. I'm so sorry.
So what about Will Elder? Like, did you ever meet him? First off,
I met him at that same comic convention, and that I remember. And
yeah,
I've always been really like I never wanted to be like, hey, like I always hate when comic artists act like, they're like, hey, I'm the guy who does whatever,
mhm.
image comic to Jack Kirby or something, because
Uh,
you just think he's like, who gives a shit,
right,
who cares? So I never wanted to like say I was a cartoonist or anything. I would just like, honor to meet you, sir.
yeah.
And I'd actually written the foreword for his book, and I don't think I even mentioned that. Yeah. So
Yeah, I love that book, by the way. I'm trying to get Gary to
that's
print that. To
is it out of print? I was actually
yeah,
I've been talking to a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, and I told him the phrase chicken fat, and he wants to like make his films dense with detail like that. And he's just obsessed with that idea. So I was going to buy him that
yeah.
monograph.
It's you can probably, I'm sure you can get one directly off the shelf at Fantagraphics, but if you try and get one on eBay or something, it's pretty expensive right now.
Really?
Yeah,
It's a great book.
and I think it's because I look at it a lot. I mean, that's one of the first books that I got when I was like, I'm going to be a professional cartoonist. I got a copy of that,
I
and
wish the like the help and mad stuff was printed better. It's kind of scanned from copies and doesn't look that great.
yeah, well, it could that book could really benefit from like a because they have all these beautiful designers working at Fantagraphics now, so they could really make it such a beautiful thing now. Um, and Gary's like, well, it's like 12 people that are gonna be interested in that right now. I'm like, yeah, but just like put it on the Fantagraphics underground line and then just do it as a print on demand or something.
I remember years ago seeing a interview with David Mamet. I think it was on Charlie Rose or something,
Mhm.
and he said something about comics, and he was kind of shitting on comics, and I was sort of like, hey man, and then he was like, of course, except for the great Will Elder, who's something like as great as any artist, and I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
pretty shocking, pretty impressive. Yeah.
The tragedy about Will Elder to me is that he never did his own books. Like he doesn't. There's no like Will Elder. Like it's just pure Elder. Really, it's like
Yeah,
I was working with a writer. So
yeah, and with the Kurtzman layouts.
yeah, and I love. I mean, I'm a huge Kurtzman. I love Kurtzman so much, but um, Kurtzman, it's like he had no faith in his own artistic abilities, so he just gave up, started just writing.
Yes, that's what it was. I don't know.
It was a bummer, man, because you look at the early stuff that he was doing, it's like the most beautiful
It's the
cartoon you've ever
best,
seen.
best like black and white comics ever created.
Yeah, incredible. And then
All
it's
those
just
the pre like EC like Pot Shot Pete and all that stuff.
yeah,
It's like as good as it gets.
Jungle Book. I mean, that's like I love all that stuff. But then
Yeah,
you see like the cover of Bijou Funnies that he did, where it's just like,
yeah,
dude, like what happened, man? What happened? You just did this with like a big pen. Like I still appreciate it. Like I like
yeah.
I still
Still
love it.
incredible, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's just like he didn't care anymore. He wasn't trying to impress anybody, and he felt beaten down, I think. But man, and I think like the EC stuff that where it's like a real heavy brush line
mm,
where it looks like he's really like doing it super fast and just naturally. I think he like labored over that to make it look, like it's done quickly. And I think he killed himself, like really getting it perfect.
yeah. Like he didn't feel like he was qualified enough to be an artist at EC or something. Like it's a
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. He should be.
you never
I
met
mean, all those guys, you think like, oh, they should have done 20 more years of great work, and there just was no place for that.
yeah. And also they had to make a living. They had families to support.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's the big
yeah,
problem.
it's a
Um,
tragedy. If they knew their art was going to sell on Heritage for tens of thousands of dollars, they could have, like maybe they would have invested in something. Or, I don't know.
do you like the Mad Monster Party?
Yeah, of course. Who do you think you're talking to? Yeah, yeah.
Did he wrote that, right? Or he was
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember what like when that came on TV as a kid, which was of course the only way you could see it.
uh
It was like a gift from God. It was like the heavens opened and like the Mad Monster Party is on today. Just like I cannot believe this is on. And I must have been 20 or something before I went. Wait, Harvey Kurtzman did that? Like, it didn't even occur to me to read the credits.
yeah. Was that Will Elder? Did he work on it too or not?
I think so.
I think Jack Davis did the character
Yeah,
designs.
Davis for sure. I'm not sure if Elder was on it. Elder's too realistic or something for that.
In the month of October, I rewatched the Universal Monster movies,
Yeah,
Ghost and Mr.
I actually rewatched those this year for the first time in many years and got a huge kick out of them.
Yeah.
I just watched The Black Cat last night. In fact,
Oh yeah. No, I love all that.
disturbing. I I showed my wife had never seen The Mummy, and she watched it, and she's like, "He's not a mummy. He wasn't preserved. You know, he's just a dead guy wrapped in a bandage." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. You ruined it for me."
And he's a mummy for, like 3 minutes of the movie, and then he's just a
Right.
guy in a fez.
And he's just Boris Karloff really was just the best looking human who ever lived. Like he just had the best face.
Yeah.
I feel like I got into drawing just because I wanted to draw that face almost.
Yeah, I heard that he had a bridge in one side of his mouth that he removed when he played Frankenstein, so that he'd have that indent in one cheek.
I mean, he really has those shadows, you know, you
Yeah.
really in Black Cat too. He looks like, you know, like a glam rocker or something. He's got this like heavy eye makeup and that big like V-shaped hairdo. I
Yeah.
always I always forget that Bela Lugosi's name in that movie is Vitus Weirdagast. Why isn't that more known?
I love when they had Bela Lugosi play Frankenstein.
I did too. It was as a kid, it was just so wrong.
It
Like,
just looks
what are you doing?
And the whole thing was like, he in the previous Frankenstein movie, they had taken Igor's brain and put it into Frankenstein's body.
Right.
So then they were just like, well, let's just have Bella play the monster this time, and it just looks so silly. He looks really short. I don't. It just does not work at all. Man.
I remember after when the Coppola Dracula came out in
Mhm.
the 90s. I remember saw Gilbert Hernandez like right after he'd seen the movie, and he was really like he just seemed real angry about it. And I was like, "What was it really bad?" And he was like, "After all this time, why would they get another round-headed guy to play Dracula?"
Oh,
It was like because like Lugosi has that kind of round head, and Gary Oldman also, and he was like, Dracula should be this like skinny faced guy, and just so angry that they got another round head.
yeah. I don't have the paperback edition of April. I have this one.
Oh, you have the hardcover. All right, Mr. Show Off.
Yeah. And does the paperback have any extra stuff in there that I would want to
Uh,
advise picking up?
it has like, you know, an inside cover and just the front and back cover. That's the only new stuff.
Okay. And then are you tempted? Were you tempted to like when you're put together something like that? Are you and you're looking through it? Are you tempted to just go like nobody would notice if I fix this nose or move this
I
eye?
mean, the whole point of those collected books was to get it, to print it as it was if you actually bought the copies.
Hmm.
You know, I corrected a lot of stuff in the book collections of all, you know, the various stories, but I want it to be like facsimile editions, like just if you bought a complete set off of eBay and bound it together.
So like in caricature, the stories would be slightly different than they would have been in print in the comic book.
Maybe I'm not sure I changed anything for caricature. I definitely did for Ghost World and Velvet Glove.
Oh, really? What did you change in Velvet Glove?
Just drawings, you know, um, like Tina starts out very different than how she ends up.
Oh,
And, you know, so I got to and that was kind of, I loved that about those like serialized comics back then, is like the world coalesces as the story develops. You know, it's like the only medium where that happens, where it, like you can't, you know, you can't go back and change 8 ball 4 while you're working on 8 ball 6.
yeah.
But things, you know, you realize the way things should look over time, and then it turns a certain way. And I usually tried to just keep it as it was, but there was times it was so jarring.
Hmm.
She just changed so drastically, almost like panel to panel. I was developing her.
Clay, I mean, he's completely different by the end of the book.
Yeah, but I don't think I went back and through him. Yeah, he's a lot more of like a seedy, like Tom Waits kind of guy in the
Yeah.
beginning.
When you started, was that character like based off of you when you were first starting it? Like, because you had no
No,
plan.
not really. And he wasn't necessarily based on me at all, but back then I had a mirror like right by my drawing board, and so if I was like, oh, I got to draw this fold, how does this go,
Yeah.
you know, I'd look in the mirror, and so I was just constantly looking how to get shadows and stuff on his face, and so you just slowly turn it into your own face,
Hmm.
you know, and so by the end it was like he merged, and it was like that character turned into me in a weird way, which I thought was okay, it's kind of just, there's something to it.
And then by the end of that book, did you feel like you were like was drawing a lot easier for you? Like were you more comfortable with it? Because people say this a lot about your early stuff, but it's like you can tell that you were trying so hard to draw. Like it looks like you were. It was painful almost to do
It
that.
was literally painful. Like my hand, I'd look at my hand and it was like the veins were bulging, like it was, I knew what I wanted, and I couldn't get there yet.
Yeah.
And so the frustration was so intense to be like, God damn, like not quite get it. And so but also I was on kind of like a time crunch back then. Like I really felt like I got to get these out. I can't just sit around. I didn't have the luxury I do now of just like working till I'm done and put it out.
Mhm.
I had to try to like crank out at least 2 or 3 a year. And so I would just stay up all night redrawing panels and trying to get it right. And there is just that intense struggle that's visible in the inking and the penciling. And I don't know, it bothered me for a long time. I didn't like that was so transparent, but then over time I got to see how much that really says about the story and what I was doing. It
Mhm.
really imbues it with this intensity, I think.
And were you doing like a mixture of a brush and then a pen back then, or still?
It was all mostly brush, but I would do like any like word balloon or anything. I was using like a circle template, I was doing it very like mechanically. And I would fix, like if I did a brush line and it wasn't perfect, I'd fix it with like a French curve and a rapidograph and stuff.
So I heard that when you went to Pratt, right?
Yeah.
And then I've been told that you would like sit in on SVA classes. Is that true?
Yeah, I used to, well, at Pratt, we didn't have any big cartoonists at all, which is weird. Like, why not? And nobody even really knew anything about comics there.
Hmm.
So and then I found out like, oh, at SVA, there's like Will Eisner, Harvey Kurtzman, Robert Crumb will come into the class, all that. And so I used to go just take the train and go over and you could just walk in. I would sit in the back of Eisner's class, and Spiegelman had this great class that was a history of comics, and it was in a big auditorium, so you could really just sneak in the back and watch that.
Wow.
And I remember did this whole class about Harry Hirschfeld. He's teaching these early
Hmm.
kind of Lower East Side, just crazy comic strips. And after about 45 minutes, this kid totally bored out of his mind, like raises his hand. He's like, yes. And he's like, when are we going to get to Marvel and DC? Like he was just like, this is like week 3 and we're still on this stuff. Like I did not sign up for that.
Was that when you were there? Did you like? Was that the same time that the Kaz would have been there?
Those guys were probably 3 years older than me, maybe 2 or 3 years. And
Okay.
that was immense, when you're a freshman in college or something, so they were out of that class by the time I got there. Peter Bagg might have been
Mm.
still there a little bit. I met Bagg at some point back then in the early 80s.
Hmm.
Um, I just remember a lot of people who did not get who Eisner and Kurtzman and Spiegelman were,
Yeah.
and they really just wanted to like get jobs at Marvel or Heavy Metal or something, and we're just like enduring this class. And there was always like the hippie stoner guy, like in an army jacket with the big hair, who's like, yeah, I really want to do undergrounds, and they'd be like, those are over too, there's nothing for you.
Yeah. And was Raw happening at the time?
Raw happened while I was in art school, but it would have been after I was sitting in on those classes.
And were you ever like trying to submit to Raw, or did you even?
I knew I would never get in, so I was very resentful of it.
Okay. Yeah, I was like that. I was like that with Kramer's Ergo.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was like, I
It's
knew
a, it's
that.
a, it's a thing you must go through.
Yeah, I was like, fuck, like or
Like,
I just
damn it! When Raw came out, I actually bought 3 copies of Raw #1 my collector's instinct kicked in, which I still have.
Oh.
And I remember thinking like, this is what I've waited for my whole life to be in, but I need it to come out 5 years from now. Like I was not ready. I could see like I could get there,
Yeah,
but yeah, I wasn't there yet.
but you were in Weirdo, so that's
In one of the later weirdos. Yeah.
yeah, that's almost as good.
No, that I'm very glad I got in weirdo.
So when you were at school, Mort Todd was your roommate, right?
He was like right after I got out of Pratt, and I guess in the last few semesters.
Had you
He
met him at school or something?
No, he didn't go to. He went to Parsons with my friend from high school, and I met him there,
Hmm.
and we just were friends because he was like we were like the only two people we knew who knew like who Kurt Schaffenberger was. Like we were into old DC comics and just bonded over that.
Yeah, but then he got you a job at Cracked.
Yeah, I remember, he was just like looking for a job in the want ads, and there's some job like wanted, like office helper at Cracked magazine. And he was like, well, I'm going to go get I'll get this job. What he didn't even think of it like it was a big deal. It's just like, maybe this will be fun. Never thought about Cracked. We just made fun of Cracked our whole life. And he went in, I remember he came back the first day, he came back and he's like, I'm going to be the editor of that magazine. They don't know what they're doing. They have no idea what they're doing. It was like some new guys had bought it and they just hired these tired old guys who like had run humor magazines for years and just did the most unfunny, phoned in, just, nothing stuff. And so he was just this hotshot, young kid. He was like 20 years old, 21 years old. And yes, sure enough, within like 6 weeks, he was the editor of the magazine. And he had me, I did a strip for them, and it was like the guys who own the company wanted to show that like we're in charge and we know what we're doing. So they were like, okay, this guy's good, this guy's good, this guy's no good, this guy's good, this guy's no good. And they got rid of my stuff. It just random, they just picked people at random. And so I'm like, shit, I really needed the money. That was like the greatest moment of my life that I got to work professionally and Crack. And he was like, well, just come up with another name. And they won't. And I was like, they're not that stupid. And he was like, no, they are. And so I just came up with Stosh Gillespie, which is like the name my dad wanted to name me and my middle name.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, this guy, Stosh Gillespie, he's great. Bring him on. So they were fine with him. So, and they didn't know, so they're writing the checks to this other guy or anything. So yes,
Did,
a couple of years of
did Lloyd Llewellyn happen? Like, were you working on that while you were working for Cracked?
yeah, right around the same time.
So
It's funny. I look back at like I have these like old ledger books I have from back in the day. Where I wrote down every single time I made money selling, like doing a strip or how much I got for each comic. It's super fascinating. But I was getting like $200 or $300 a page for Cracked back then.
Wow.
And I bet they wouldn't even, pay that in a, any magazine now. And that's 35 years ago. It's insane.
Yeah. I was doing work for Mad and they would pay me $250 for a strip.
How much?
250.
I mean, that's insane. Think of the cost of a car in that time.
Yeah. But then, and you don't have the rights to reprint that material after it's, none of the stuff I did for Mad, I can never reprint it. I'd have to get permission from Warner Brothers or something to.
Criminal. It's insane.
Yeah. But
I
you
was
just
looking at like I did illustrations for like Entertainment Weekly magazine in 1990 or so, and I would get $2,000, $2,500, and now I get people asking me to do illustrations for like New York Times magazine. It's like we can pay $300. It's like what how can that makes no sense.
Where did it go? Where did all the money go?
I mean, those used to be profitable. That's the problem.
So with Lloyd Llewellyn, I heard this story about how you had put together the first comic that you had sent to Fantagraphics for basically for them to give you feedback on the comic and stuff. And
Yeah.
you'd colored it and everything on with
I
acid.
actually just found that. Do you want to see it?
I would love to see that. Yeah.
This is the actual like binder I sent. This was in Gary Groth's office, like totally lost for 25 years. And then one day somebody is like, "Hey, I think this is yours. Send it back." I was like, "What?" That's literally the first thing I sent. So it's like, I don't know if you can see, but it's
Oh, okay.
I colored it on. I made like film, uh, photostats, and I colored it with cell animation paint. So it's like these are like that blue is like painted on the back.
Oh my God.
I'll dig it out. See, it's really weird. I don't know what I mean. I just didn't know how to get this kind of. I wanted this flat color, so you can see like here's the backgrounds, and then here's this, and it's like the colors are painted on the back.
So how
And
would they have shot that with like a camera or something? And
I mean, it
then
was never printed. I don't know what they would have. Yeah, they would have shot it, and it would have looked terrible.
so that was a question I had. If that was the same story that opens up the first issue of Lord Llewellyn, which it is.
Yeah, it's exact. I mean, I think I added Zipatone.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just doing this for fun. I wanted to see how it looked. It was the longest comic I ever did in my life by like 5 pages.
And it's like 8 pages long.
Yes, I mean, I used to. I have so many elaborate splash pages that I would draw when I was younger. Where it's the city and all that, and then panel two of panel one of page two. I'm like, ah, fuck,
Yeah.
and then it's like I forget, and I would
Yeah.
never. I don't think I ever even made it to page three.
So that's funny. I've noticed that in Gary's office that it's just a mountain of stuff. And I remember seeing like original Love and Rockets pages just like in a pile there. And I was just
I
like,
mean, and Gary's office is like anal retentive compared to what Kim's was like.
oh, really? Oh, okay.
Kim was one of the like Kim's office looked like you took a normal office packed with stuff and then you just shook it up and like turned it upside down and then put it back. And he was always like, "Well, I know where everything is." And then any time I would ask him for something, he's like, "I don't know where that is. I have no idea where that." I remember there was an artist that Gary really liked who was in Prime Cuts. This
Hmm.
guy named Mitch Manzer who did this sort of Popeye. It actually looked like Huizenga a little bit.
Yeah.
It was sort of EC Cigar influence. He was pretty good. And I remember he like sent Kim a painting or something, and it was like in the middle of Kim's office, like dented with a footprint in the middle. Like, what the fuck? What are you doing? I was wondering, like, what if Mitch Manzer just dropped in, like, "Hey guys, like, what? Like, what are you doing? Why is my painting?"
Pat Moriarty's shoe print on it. What so so Lord Llewellyn, I guess, was a failure for Fantagraphics, right, at the time, even though it sold
Sold
pretty well for the
last issue sold 6,000 copies.
yeah, which is amazing.
Now it'd be like a Image comic.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It would be you'd have an Eisner Award.
Yeah,
So, it's interesting that they then gave you a second chance with 8 Ball, and what I think is even better than that is that they didn't stick any house ads for critters or anything in 8 Ball. It
I
was
insisted because that they made it like you have to do that, and then somebody else, of course, did a comic without that, and I was like, okay, come on, I didn't have to do that, but I think the reason they published 8 Ball is because Dennis Kitchen was going to do it. He agreed to do it,
oh, okay.
and I think Gary couldn't bear the thought of that.
Yeah, they've had a long-standing
Yeah, I just
rivalry.
think, and back then they were still sort of friendly competitors, but I think I just remember like, Kitchen's like, anytime you want to do something, and so I told him that idea, and he was like, great, and uh, and then Gary was like, oh, no, no, we'll do it.
I dug out the and by the way, I thought there were only 3 issues of Lloyd Llewellyn. I didn't know that there were 6.
Six and a comic size one, so seven really.
Yeah, I have the comic size one, was that just, like, stories that just didn't make it into a 7th issue that you just repackaged it?
No, no, there was the whole thing after it was canceled. Gary was like I think it could get a huge audience if it was like in color, and I was like, great, And he's like, I want you to do it as a comic, and we'll do it in color, and we're gonna, and then so I spent a year killing myself on that, and and then colored the whole thing. And then Gary's like, yeah, we can't afford to do color.
Oh
And
man.
I was like, you, in the cover, it's like, it says in black and white, and I put that there because I had to cover up the thing that said in color.
And were you doing that issue the same time that you were doing 8 Ball #1? 'Cause I think it's
No,
68, right?
no, it was way, but it was like a couple years before.
Oh, okay. So you had a couple year period where you just thought your career was over in comics and you're just
Pretty
like
much. Yeah, pretty much. I did a lot of, I did stuff for Cracked, and I started to get weird little freelance jobs and stuff. And I was just sort of trying to figure it out,
Mhm.
you know.
And
But at a certain point, I was like, I got to do the thing I want to do. And I mean, I would have just Xeroxed it myself if nobody published it.
yeah. But was 8 Ball #1 a hit right out of the gate, or did it take a while?
It was, it wasn't like, I mean, back then it was like, it was sort of mattered like how many it sold before it came out.
Mhm.
And so the sales were pretty low. I think the first issue, maybe we printed 5,000 of them. It was definitely down from Lloyd Llewellyn. But I just remember like it was a different feeling. Like I would go to the conventions, and everybody was coming by like before they'd be like, oh, I like Lloyd Llewellyn. But with this, everybody's coming by like, oh, 8 Balls, really? I could tell like, oh, they actually like it. It's not just being nice. And
Yeah.
it had this whole different feeling. And then it just kind of took off from there.
But
So by like the middle of the year after it came out, it won all the awards and stuff.
yeah, and that's what saved it, because I would imagine if it didn't sell as well as the last issue of Lloyd Llewellyn, Gary would be
I think he would have given me like 3 or 4 issues probably, which is all I really planned on.
mhm. Dan Poussey was a
Depends who I'm talking to, how I pronounce his name.
yeah.
Like my son's, friend's parents. Dan
Yeah.
Poussey.
Dan Poussey. But like, wouldn't that's the kind of thing that you feel safe drawing at your drawing board, but then you have to go out and face the public behind a table at a
I
comic con.
didn't, I didn't care back then. Who cares? It wasn't
Yeah.
like anybody. I just, I didn't have any connection to that other world, and
Mhm.
good riddance.
Were you able to make a living just from 8 Ball?
I mean, 8 Ball led to so many things. I was doing record covers, and every comic wanted a cover, and so there's just all these little kind of easy, fun little side jobs that kept me going. And so doing a bunch of illustrations and stuff, and 8 Ball, that was, yeah, I was able to earn an 80s, early 90s living, which was a different world.
Yeah. Well, the rent was a lot cheaper. So, like, if you would have gotten an illustration that paid $2,000, that would have set you
A
up
couple
for
months rent right there.
yeah. That's and then you're just thinking, all right, this is how the rest of my career is going to go. I'm just going to be doing these.
Oh, totally. I mean, every month, you had to come up with something new. It's not a secure feeling of like, if I like, I remember one time I bashed my thumb. A door blew open into my thumb and broke it. And I couldn't work for like 3 months. And I was just like, it was just, I was drowning, I was like, what am I going to do? So,
And then you
um,
have Gary Groth calling you like the issue's late.
where is, I thought you said you'd have it. Um, yeah. So, it was definitely like a tightrope walk, but it felt like, yeah, I can, swing this rent for a little apartment. I didn't struggle in the way you would now.
Mhm.
It was such a better world for that kind of thing.
And then as 8 Ball becomes more and more popular, does that put any kind of pressure on you to outdo yourself, or you become self conscious at all while working on it because you know that people are anticipating this and what you're gonna write next and stuff?
Tried not to be, I really feel, and more than ever, I just feel like when I'm working, I'm not thinking about that stuff really.
Mhm.
When it comes out, then I think about it, then I'm like, oh shit, I can see why this was really off-putting, or why, like I could have done this and tweaked it and made it much more popular.
Mm.
But when I'm working on it, I'm just completely happy to be in that world of just working on it. And at this point, that's all I want to do is just be working, and I don't really enjoy the aspect of it like being put out there. I want like a perfect copy to exist, but I don't need that feeling of like everybody's reading it. It just makes me more uncomfortable than anything, really.
Hey, have you ever read this stuff before?
Yeah, I've got that in the other room.
Do you like these comics?
Yeah, kind of. I like Casper always kind of creeped me out, but I like the other Harvey comics.
Hot Stuff. Do you like that one?
Richie Rich, yeah, hot stuff is always the weirdest. The little
Yeah.
devil, like what? Like how did that become a thing?
And it's all the same character. Like somebody said that Casper,
Same character. It's like, yeah, it's like a tracing of the same guy.
yeah, really, Casper is Richie Rich's ghost. Like
Right.
he died.
When I was a kid, when I was like 16, I think I was flying somewhere with my grandma, and at the airport, I bought a whole bunch of Harvey comics, and I was like real embarrassed, but I just want to read these Harvey comics, like comfort food. And I was reading Hot Stuff, and my grandma looks at me and just shakes her head, and I was like, oh man, she's like thinks I'm a cretinous child, and she goes, "Is that pornographic?" Because it was just like this little devil, I'm just like, what else would it be? Like, what else would a teenager be? It's like, sadly, no, it's for babies.
For babies. It really is. I was reading those Casper comics last night before bed, and they really are like they keep you like I'm entertained by them, and they are comforting, but they really are for babies. It's the same comic over and over again. He wants to be friends with somebody, and they get freaked out and they run away. And it's
That's how we all feel. Yeah. Charlie loved Little Lulu, the
oh
like the Dark Horse reprints. So
yeah, I've got those.
yeah,
These color ones.
yeah, exactly. He read every one of them.
Yeah, those are timeless. Those are like
Yeah, but Remy might dig those.
yeah. I bet he will. And then also, what do you think of this?
Yeah. Oh, I haven't seen that. I used to love his stuff in Lampoon.
This is from
I didn't even know that
Fantagraphics.
existed. Huh.
Yeah, it's got a foreword by Tim Allen.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. It's there. The stuff that Fantagraphics publishes is so much that you would have just completely missed that.
I,
Uh,
I haven't been to the comic store in a couple of weeks, so. But
yeah,
that's one I just didn't even. I would buy that in a minute. I love all those guys.
yeah. Me too. I love it. It's sort of it has the same kind of like squareness as like a Dave Berg or something. It's like
Yeah,
very
it felt like Lampoon's Dave Berg.
and the guy. It's really funny. He's in the back. There's a picture of him.
Oh, really? I've never seen a picture of him.
Can you see? It's amazing.
Like from 50 years ago, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, but he looks like a Vegas singer.
He looks like a magician.
Yeah, yeah. So I recommend it. It's good stuff.
Oh, I'll get Eric to send it. Ed Sabitsky's stuff.
No,
He drew. It was almost kind of like Bleckman, like these little tiny, very noodly drawings. That the writing is fantastic. He's like one of the unsung greats.
oh, they're doing a book of his stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Which I think I told him to do in about 1990, but
Uh,
I just found this Archie comic in my collection. It's good. I don't know if you can.
oh, you have that one?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I bought it from Comic Relief, the comic store, and I think they gave it to me actually in Berkeley. And on the back it says Betty and Me, number 16, $1 million.
Talking about 8-Ball a little bit more. Did you, when you were planning out an issue, would you plan out the whole issue like in a sketchbook, or would you be working on just basically like putting together a bunch of stories that you would eventually go like, well, this one fits with this one? I mean, were you thinking about that?
Oh, you mean in terms of like the little extra?
Well, like you're working on like a story. You're going, okay, I need to do a new issue of 8-Ball. uh, I could take this story that I kind of had an idea for and put that in there, like finish it, and then that would go well with this, Shamrock Squid. I
Right.
can go-
I tried to mix it up. I didn't want it to feel the same type of story over and over.
yeah.
I tried to have a real variety. I want it to be like a Lawrence Welk show or something, like the variety show where, we have the guy playing the organ and then the
Uh-huh.
three sisters are singing, where it just has that feel of like, well, I'm sick of this one after 8 pages. Well, okay, I'll try that, or
Yeah.
just like you couldn't get bored somehow unless you just hated the whole thing all in one piece. And I just felt like by filtering it all through myself, like by me doing everything, it would have a cohesion to it that would keep it together just naturally,
Mhm.
but I didn't know. I was just doing it by instinct.
When's the last time you've done like a one-page strip?
I do them in my sketchbooks sometimes, just if I think of a funny joke, but they're all like, they're not worth like drawing and printing somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, I don't. It's hard for me to think. Like I'm often trying to write short strips
Mhm.
uh, for my books and stuff, and it never. It just turns into 16 pages before you know it.
Yeah. It would
Just
be
not in that headspace anymore. I get more and more information, and then it's like, I'm still cutting out tons of stuff as I do it, um, but I just have so much story that I want to tell in the short space.
because it would be amazing if you just did like a short story that just showed up in an issue of Now, just like
I thought about, I've actually thought of that many times, like, oh, I could do this for now,
yeah.
or something, or just even a more obscure magazine.
There's also like a zine called Spread the Love, and that's the one that have you heard of
Oh,
that before?
no, I like the name.
It's their whole thing is like we're gonna take all the comics and cartoonists that are so weird that like nobody else will publish them anymore. Like they're doing really kind of offensive work that you would have seen like in a comic anthology back in the 80s or 90s.
Sure,
Like
yeah.
Pete Bag does a lot of work for them right now and stuff. It's just like
Publishes it.
it's just a self-published or it's published by some random person.
Oh,
But it's called Spread the Love, and it's just like
I
really
get this. I love that kind of thing.
yeah. And so when you're going through 8 Ball, do you go like when you look at a story, does it take you back in the same way that uh like an old photograph would or something? Like you know exactly where you were at the time you drew that?
Not when I look at the comics, I don't really feel that, but when I look at the artwork, I do.
Hmm.
I used to have it really vivid, like where I'd look at the artwork and I'd hear like what was on the radio when I was drawing, just really intense.
Yeah. And it was
But
just, like you look at an old like 8 Ball #1 and you just hear Jack Webb singing Try a Little Tenderness.
exactly.
Just like, oh yes.
Ah, the old days. Yeah, no, I mean it was very it had like a real intense, but now it's so long ago that that's all kind of faded. I don't really have that so much.
And you don't go back and reread any of that old work, right?
Only when it's like when I have to, like when I did the Complete Eightball, I had to write about it, so I read it all then.
Yeah.
So that was pretty interesting. I was reading stuff as though I'd never read it. I had no idea what was going to happen in certain stories. Just I put it away the day I finished it, never read it again.
Mm.
And so to make yourself laugh 20, 30 years later, that's a real feat. That's a very weird dialogue you're having.
Does that attitude change like once you become a father? You're suddenly just like, did you feel like you didn't have that kind of chip on your shoulder that you had?
No, it gets more intense in a way because you're back then it was like, what did I care if the world went down in flames?
Right.
That'll be fun to watch. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, this is serious. Like I've got to you know, like take this seriously, all the stuff that's affecting my
Hmm.
son's life, and not just like Trump elected or what, but the culture. It's like, I want to make sure he understands, uh, the culture in a way that I think is useful for him, or the way that I believe you should see art and things like that and their role in the world.
Yeah. You have a stake in society all of a sudden. It's like when you have a
Yeah,
a
it's
father.
it's it's very different. I mean, I think there's a real reason why all the great children's book authors don't have kids, because they are kids. They're still kids, and that's how they see the world, and they can write as kids. And once you're a parent, it's very difficult to go back to that.
I've heard you say this before too, and I feel the same way. It's like when you did Ghost World, you related to the girls when you were working on it, but then like at a certain point, you related more to Ina's dad, and
Yeah,
it's like
yeah. Now I'm just like that's the only character I see myself. Yeah.
I my one of my favorite lines in that whole film is from that actor. It makes me laugh every time, and they're sitting at the table, and he's just putting jam on a piece of toast, and
That's
she's
my favorite scene in the movie.
yeah, it's so good, and
Just
she's and he
one take, and they're just and the way she's so disgusted by her dad. That's so real.
I want to end the interview, Dan, because I took a half hour longer than I told you I was going to take.
All right. I love talking to you.
Yeah, it was great.